Very thankful to the Department of History, Delhi University for having invited me over to the 100-year celebrations, although I am not at all related with your university or your department. I mean, since yesterday I have been hearing almost all these speakers telling about their connections with the Department of History. My only connection with the Department of History at the moment is that my younger daughter has offered history in her BA, but not in the department in Kamla College. That is the only, which is, my connection. However, there are a lot of, important works which have been published from the University of Delhi History Department, which naturally as students and then as teachers, we went through. And those works include not only works on ancient and modern India, but also certain works which were quite crucially important for the study of medieval India. Although I come from a center which is known for medieval Indian studies, but there are certain, great scholars of medieval Indian history which have been produced and were connected with the Department of History, University of Delhi. And today, as I take up this mic to speak today, I pay my tribute to each and every one of them. In fact, since today morning we have been hearing about the weavers, mendicants, the yogis, the vairagis, but I would like to take you to something different, and that is emerging identities and practices of lamenting Husain in medieval India. I mean, this is something which in popular understanding is thought that the Shia community within the Muslims became prominent and came into their own only during the late 18th or 19th century. And there are two places which are actually associated with this development, the Awadh as well as Murshidabad, Bengal, and of course Bijapur and Gurgaon. And all these places are those places which are in their turn related with the Iranians. And so one popular perception has been that as a community, the Shias came into their own only after the decline of the Mughal Empire. And secondly, that their structures which were devoted to their activities, the Mambaras, were also something which, number one, developed during the 19th century generally, and number two, that they were actually derived and copies of those which had been found in Iran. My paper, this is one of the themes which I have started with a number of years back, and I have presented a number of papers devoted to this theme, and I am actually still in the process of developing it. To these students who are sitting here, I would recommend that in the Studies in People's History, Volume 4, Number 1, the first of the series of this article, The State, Shias and Shiism in Medieval India, has been published. Before that, there was another paper, the Shia Muslims, Religious Movements and Institutions in Medieval India, which was published in a volume edited by Professor J.S. Grewal. And that was published way back in 2006. So intermittently from 2006 till date, I have been working on this thing, not constantly, but I would pick up one point here and then forget about it, and after a few years I would pick up some other strain of that theme at a later date. But today I would be trying to not take much of your time, although if you go by my presentation, my slides, all those from Aligarh know me that I also, just like my friend Arvind, do not stop when the mic comes in my hand. But I promise that because I am also quite tired after listening to papers since morning, and I can understand what's happened to you as well. So I would try to be as brief as possible and would be only giving you certain important things which I think that being in Delhi you should be aware of. Generally the impression which I talked about, that the Shias as a community did not develop under the Mughals, is based on one thing, and that is that almost all the primary Mughal sources, that is those sources which were written during the period of the Mughals in Persian, generally the belief is that they do not mention any Shi religious activity. They might be mentioning a few names whom they allege that perhaps they were the Shias, but to substantiate them, their point, what were the practices as a community which this community was performing, there would be no reference in any of the primary sources written, composed, compiled during the classical Mughal period in Persia. This is the general belief. Although on the other hand, if you look at the travelogues, whether they are of the Portuguese or the English or even the Arab travelers who come to India, there we do find a mention of certain activities which show that there was a community which was different from the Hanafi Sunni community which was dominating in the Indian subcontinent. I tried to revisit these sources, and after revisiting these sources, I came to the conclusion that perhaps we were searching for certain things without paying attention to the changed terminology. For example, those of you who know about the Shias, they know that their lamentation ceremony today is known as Majlis. Majlis is any assembly. And the term Majlis does occur in the sources, but assemblies which were being held for any type of work, whether it is in the Sufi silsilas, whether the Majlis is a political one or a religious one, whether related with the theologians of this order or that order, any assembly where certain things were discussed were known as Majlis, and thus the term Majlis as understood today is very different. But did the term or did such type of assemblies take place during the medieval period? Because there was no such reference associated with the term Majlis in any of the sources, everyone concluded that no, the Mughals were suppressing the Shiites and thus nothing was happening. In fact, what I start getting is that there's a different term which has been used. Taskir. Taskir is the term. Once again, it is a term which is used for a number of type of things. But then we have the specific reference of Minhajus Siraj, who says that he would indulge in taskir means taskira, to narrate something. So tazkir virtually would be narration of any incident, not necessarily lamenting Imam Husain. But then he points out that, I deliver these tazkirs on a number of occasions, and one of the occasions which he mentions is the Ashrae Muharram, the first 10 days of Muharram, in which then he goes on to specify that this is the period that when during the tazkirs he narrates the incidents the incident of Karbala, whatever happened in the camp of Imam Husain at Karbala, at the hands of the army of Yazid. Number 2, he does not talk about only the imperial cities. He talks about giving such tazkis even in military camps and in subsidiary towns. So perhaps even from Tabaqat-e Nasiri, if you look at some of the evidences which I am giving to you, that the lamentation of Imam Husain, the assembly where the mourning was taking place, Market Tabaqat-e Nasiri is writing about the time, which is the time of Sultan Iltutmish, the beginning of the Delhi Sultanate. And he's talking about lamentations taking place not only in Delhi and the central places, but also in regions like Gwalior. Then another thing which has been told to us by the general historians of medieval India, which includes one of my very highly respected historians from Aligarh, Professor Syed and others, and that is that there was much persecution of the Shiites, especially during the period of the Tughlaqs. Firoz Shah Tughlaq is supposed to be one of those persons who persecuted not only the Sunnis, the Hindus, but also the Shias. Now it is during this period that we find that Ibn Battuta, in fact, comes to India and he mentions Muharram as one of the prominent festivals along with the Eid. Number 2, around the same period when it is said that the persecution of the Shias are taking place, there is a Sufi saint, Syed Muhammad Ashraf Jahangir Simnani, who comes to India and he comes along with the alam, which is a symbol of the Shias today. So mark it that whether it is the reference of Tabaqat-e Nasiri, whether it is Jahangir Simnani, whether it is the reference of Ibn Battuta, they are not talking about these practices being confined to the Shia community, but they are talking about these things happening amongst the Muslims of all varieties at this particular moment of time. Jahangir Simnani is not a Shia. He is a Sufi. But he brings something which ultimately ended up being the symbol of a particular community by the time that Mughals come into this. The Majlis is concretized by the time of the Nawabs of Awadh into something which belongs particularly to the Shia community. It's having origins which do not belong. I mean, there is, we talk about a Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, an intermingling of all together. And that is what we start finding as far as the commemorations and celebrations of Muharram. Another issue which I have taken, and I have been given I think 3 minutes back, there's 5 minutes are left. So I'll hurry up. And that is that perhaps you might have heard the term Tazia. Tazia is a symbol, a replica of wood or paper or any material which is supposed to represent the tomb of Imam Husain in India. And it is said, whereas the Shia ceremony है तो ईरान से आई होगी, must have been derived from Iran. In Iran, yes, there was Tazia, but in Iran, what I try to argue is that in Iran, Tazia meant a performance, a drama, where a performance was enacted to show what happened. And it is also said that the Iranian drama, theatre in fact, develops from the Tazia. Right? But in India, it does come, and it is said that Taimur came in India with this Tazia. In fact, my father, who was a theologian and was writing on this theme, he wrote a Tarikh-e-Azadari, and he got confused and he said that Taimur brought this Tazia which is before us. Tazia, actually in the form which is known in India, was never brought by Taimur. Tazia also has another meaning, something which you honor and to which you pay your obeisance. Taziyat dena, where because if you go to someone whose father had died, we say that Taziyat ke liye, to remember honoring someone who's dead. So I don't have time, but then there is also a Farman of Aurangzeb which talks about Taimur's Tazia, and that is the rumal and handkerchief which was associated with the martyrs of Karbala. So it was something which was related, and it was on occasions they in Hyderabad, that particular handkerchief is now encased into an alam, and it is brought out on a date. So what Taimur had brought to India was just a symbol, nothing else. Jahangir Simnani, I just mentioned, brought the alam. Today, the alams are taken out in procession. But the earliest references which we find when Jahangir Simnani is mentioned, that the alam was fixed in his takiya. Takiya means the place where he used to sit. Now, from this Bijapur, Jahangir Simnani came during the Tughlaq period. This is also very close in time, but from Bijapur, not from North India. But we look at, this is the takiya of a Sufi saint, where a Sufi is sitting, white beard, long hairs, white beard, and then the alams are fixed. They are fixed on the takiya of. Perhaps this was how for the first time, and this continued up till the company papers, which were made during the 19th century. And in fact, if you go to my hometown in eastern Uttar Pradesh, till date during the Muharrams, the alams are fixed in the same fashion as we find in that painting dating back to 15th century. So what I am trying to point out, these are certain of the images which show the enactment of the drama Taziyeh in Iran. Even there is another thing which, and perhaps on this I would end. I won't go further because if I click, then I would start speaking myself. Mullah Abdul Qadir Badayuni is generally taken to be a man who hates the Shias. I mean, in fact, he hates both Hindus and Shias. There is a person of Shia origin when he dies, so he says that he died the death of a pig. So this is the personality. I mean, this is one of the ways in which the modern historians have interpreted it, and it is actually not that. I mean, the story is not that simple. Still,
Abdul Qadir Badayani, in his Muntakhab al-Tawarikh, supposedly a man who is against the Shia, mentions that in Delhi, during the Muharrams, there is Marsiya Khwani, elegies being recited at various places, and he gives the name of a Marsiya Khwan. A specific name is given, and an example of his Marsiya is also. Marsiya is any lamentation. Amir Khusro is also said to have said Marsiyas. But the type of verses which Mullah Abdul Qadir Badayani gives in his Muntakhab shows that those verses are actually the Marsiya in the same fashion as the Marsiyas of Miranis during the 19th century. Now, one of the other things which, and then I go on to other things, I'll just skip them. All these ceremonies, there were certain assigned spaces where these were taking place. Ma'arik was a term used by Mullah Abdul Qadir Badayani. We do find a Ma'arik in Kashmir dating back to the pre-Mughal period. The site is there, the reference is there. Actually, when the first commander of the Mughal army went to conquer Kashmir, he got the original structure demolished, and it is then that he is mentioning that this Ma'arik was a place where the commemorations of Muharram were taking place. That Ma'arik still exists in Zadibad in Kashmir. But then in Delhi itself, the Tughlaq period, the period supposedly the period when persecution was taking place, but also the period when alam was introduced into the Indian subcontinent, just in front of the New Delhi railway station, there still exists this Tughlaq Imambara in the Paharganj region. The shape of this Imambara, Intact has actually worked hard on it. The shape of this Imambara is almost same as the Imambara which I discovered at Fatehpur Sikri, capital of Akbar. It is number one, either late Akbar's period or Jahan's. So I will leave all the other details. So what I have told today is that there are certain practices through which the community is developing. Initially, those practices are being derived from other communities, but then there are spaces which we ignore because there is a certain other kind of terminology which is being used by our sources, and those examples still remain. बड़े इमामबाड़े में लखनऊ में जाके ये मत कहिएगा कि पहला है, और ये मत कहिएगा कि गोलकुंडा वाला बादशाही इमामबाड़ा पहला है. No, I showed you that in your Delhi you have an Imambara, which is recorded as an Imambara. It is also recorded by Bashir Hasan, who writes it. Still, in the legal documents, the papers are Imambara. Still, the majlises are going on, but by the Sunni, not by the Shias, and that is why it was ignored. Right? So, perhaps Tughlaq period Imambara is the first one, the earliest which survives, even from the Mughal period in Akbar's capital. We do have, and both these Imambaras are almost of the same size, quite big. Chote mote gharwale nahi the. They were, which had some patronage. There is much more to say in this, but I would refrain myself due to two things. One, that much time has been taken. Number two, I am still working on this paper, and I hope that I'll keep on looking at resources and would keep on adding to it, and perhaps by next year or next to next, I'll come up with a properly written paper. Thank you.